Hi, I'm Daniel, and what you are about to hear is not your ordinary love story. It is about a single father whose world revolved around his daughter and a powerful CEO who thought she had everything. Fate brought us together on a rainy night, when a broken engine and a careless laugh planted the seed of something neither of them expected to change their lives forever. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you." That's what she said to me, the CEO with heels that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. She laughed as she said it, like it was nothing more than a joke thrown into the rain. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Because for me it was never about the words. It was about the engine and about the life I lived with these hands. My name is Daniel, and my world has always smelled of motor oil and long afternoons. I work in a small garage wedged between a laundromat and a bakery that's been closed for years. The lights hum, the radio plays the same old country songs, and somehow it feels like home. By day I fix engines. By night I fold laundry, warm milk bottles, and read bedtime stories to my little girl, Lily. She's my compass, my reason, the laugh that keeps me moving. I won't lie to you, I'm not a man of fortune. My wall calendar is circled with paydays I can barely count on. Life hasn't been gentle. A sudden divorce, jobs that paid more in promises than dollars, nights when the electricity went out because I couldn't pay on time. But I carried each loss the way I fix dents on an old car. Hammer it flat, paint it over, and keep moving. Because no matter what, I had Lily, and she deserved my smile, not my despair. Across town there's Claire. Her world couldn't be more different from mine. She lives in glass towers that stretch into the sky, the kind of places you only see in magazines. She's a CEO, the kind of woman who moves markets with a single signature. Her days are scheduled down to the minute, her heels clicking faster than most people's heartbeats. And her laugh? When she lets herself laugh, it sounds like champagne glasses clinking in victory. But that night, when the rain painted the city in streaks of light, her car coughed and stuttered right in front of my shop. She wasn't used to being stuck, not like that, not in my part of town. Her driver explained the problem, but I hardly heard him. She leaned against the glossy hood with the kind of smile that said inconvenience wasn't always a bad thing. "If you fix this engine, I'll marry you," she said. And me? I just looked at her, then looked down at my hands that knew how to bring dead things back to life. "All right," I told her. "Let's see what she needs." I leaned into that engine the way I lean into life. Steady, patient, and without show. The rain tapped its rhythm above us, and for a moment, it didn't feel like two worlds colliding. It felt like possibility. What should have been a quick job became the hinge of everything. A joke turned into a seed that wouldn't stop growing. And when I closed the hood that night, I had no idea how much one small laugh could change the rest of my life. The next morning, my life carried on the way it always did. My alarm rang at 5:30, and I moved through a quiet kitchen where the hum of the refrigerator was louder than the city outside. Lily was still curled up in her pink blanket, clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother left behind. I kissed her forehead, then packed her lunch: peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices carefully wrapped, and, if I had a little extra, a cookie. It wasn't much, but it was my way of telling her, "You are loved, you are cared for." The kettle hissed, and I drank my usual weak coffee, stretched thin to last the week. My days were split between the garage and odd jobs. Mowing lawns, fixing old appliances, patching fences. The bills never stopped piling up. But every night, no matter how tired I was, Lily's smile made me believe I could keep going. I wasn't perfect, but I was there. And sometimes presence means more than gold. At the garage the guys liked to tease me. Said I was too serious, too quiet. They weren't wrong. But what they didn't see was that machines were my language. Every scar and callus on my hands was earned. To me, engines were just puzzles, stubborn but solvable. Cars came in broken and I sent them out whole. And sometimes people walked in hopeless and walked out smiling. That's what I gave to the world, even when the world gave me very little back. But even gifts like that couldn't erase debts. Rent was often late. Lily's shoes wore thin before I could afford new ones. Life was unkind, but I carried myself with as much dignity as I could. And then there was Claire. Her mornings were so different from mine. Crystal cups of espresso. A chauffeur waiting at her door. An office with floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched over the city. She was straight-backed, commanding, confident. A woman who had never lost. But behind those glass walls, I would later learn, the silence weighed heavy. Her marriage had ended years ago, shattered by betrayal. She had been left with money, power, and scars no one could see. Since then, she built walls higher than her headquarters, walls so high that trust became something she refused to spend. Her days were crowded with meetings and phone calls. Her calendar overflowed. Yet every night, she returned to an empty penthouse, her heels echoing in lonely silence. For all her wealth, she ate alone. For all her power, her laughter rarely reached her eyes. 2 worlds. 2 lives. And yet, somehow, fate had already decided to pull them together. Her marriage had ended 5 years earlier. She had been betrayed by a man who valued profit more than loyalty, and in that betrayal, he took more than her trust. He stripped away the last pieces of her softness. Since then, Claire had built walls taller than her glass headquarters, walls so strong that trust became a currency she refused to spend. Her phone rang constantly, her schedule was booked months in advance, and her presence commanded entire boardrooms. Yet when the city lights blinked awake each night, she returned to an empty penthouse where the echo of her own heels was the only conversation. For all her wealth, she ate dinner alone. For all her power, her laughter rarely touched her eyes. And then she met me. I could feel her studying me that rainy night, the steady way I focused on her car, the way I didn't stumble over my words, the way I refused to treat her like a queen to be impressed. Men usually tripped over themselves in her presence, but I wasn't like that. To me, she wasn't a CEO. She was just a woman waiting for her car to be fixed. That, more than anything, caught her attention. "Well, you've earned it, haven't you?" she said when the engine roared back to life. I only wiped my hands and nodded. No jokes. No reply. To her, it was playful banter. To me, it was just another day's work. But something lingered. A thought she carried with her into the car, and a thought I carried back into my garage. And in that pause, a seed was planted. I didn't think of her words as a promise. I thought of them as a glimpse into a different world. A world of laughter I hadn't heard in years, a world where maybe, just maybe, someone could look at me without pity. And for Claire, it wasn't my words that echoed, but my silence. The way I didn't try to impress her, the way I simply did my job with integrity. That silence carried more weight than all the flattery she had grown used to. Life went on. I packed lunches. I fixed engines. She attended meetings and signed contracts. But beneath the rhythm of our ordinary days, something had shifted. 2 strangers, still worlds apart, were being pulled closer toward the same unseen line. Sometimes stories begin with fireworks or carefully written plans, but ours began with a broken engine, a pair of calloused hands, and a laugh that refused to fade. Neither of us knew it yet, but our paths, so distant, so different, were already bending toward each other. The next morning, Claire found herself restless. She sat in her office, papers sliding across her desk, voices droning in meetings, but her mind replayed the image of my steady hands, the furrow in my brow, and the fact that I didn't look at her like a prize to be won or a throne to kneel before. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. But curiosity has a way of pulling at the edges of walls, loosening the bricks that once felt unshakable. 2 days later, her car rolled up in front of my garage again. This time it wasn't broken, not really. I thought I heard a noise in the engine. "Can you check?" she asked. "Engines don't usually break twice in 2 days," I told her, glancing at the hood. "Maybe I'm just unlucky," she replied with a faint smile. I checked the car anyway. She pretended to scroll through her phone, but I could feel her eyes drifting toward me again and again. The truth was simple, she didn't need her car fixed. She just needed a reason to come back. When she rolled down the window, she teased, "So this is the famous assistant mechanic?" Lily, standing beside me with wide eyes, tilted her head. "Daddy, who's that lady?" "A customer," I said quickly, trying to keep it simple. Claire leaned down and smiled at my daughter. "Well, he's a very good mechanic." That was the first time she met Lily. And in that single moment, my daughter's shy smile pierced her heart in a way no boardroom victory ever could. Later that night, as she sat in her penthouse, she replayed the way my eyes softened when I looked at Lily, the way my entire being seemed to revolve around her happiness. Claire had built empires. She had toppled competitors with a single contract. But here, on a quiet street, watching a father and his daughter, she saw a strength unlike any she had ever known. When I stepped into her world, the contrast nearly crushed me. Glass walls, polished marble floors, assistants in tailored suits rushing past, and me standing there with grease faint on my shirt and papers in my hand, feeling the weight of every judging eye on my boots. But Claire cut through the whispers with her voice, warm and genuine. "You brought it yourself?" she asked. I shrugged. "You said it was urgent." For a moment, the silence of her office bent around us. A mechanic in a CEO's tower. A seed of respect quietly growing between us. But not everyone welcomed the crossing of our worlds. Back at the garage, my coworkers leaned against tool racks, smirking. "Big shot CEO coming for you, huh? Maybe she'll take you out of this dump." She's just a customer, I told them, shaking my head. They laughed anyway. Their voices carried long after their words, sowing doubt like oil seeping into cracks. And in Claire's world, the whispers were no kinder. Richard, one of her associates, raised his glass with a smirk. You've been seen in places unusual for you. With people unusual for you. Don't tell me you're entertaining the idea of lowering yourself? My time is my own, she answered coolly. Careful, Claire, Richard chuckled darkly. In our world, whispers can ruin more than scandals. She brushed him off, but his words clung to her like smoke. Because in her world, image was currency, and even the smallest rumor could topple an empire. And then there was Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, who offered her warning with kindness, though it struck like a blade. She seems kind, Daniel. But people from her world, they don't always stay. Don't let Lily get hurt. Her words weighed heavier than the wrenches I lifted every day. Despite the warnings, despite the whispers around us, Claire and I kept crossing paths. What began as short exchanges grew into longer conversations. Smiles started to linger. And sometimes even arguments sparked, not out of anger but out of two different worlds colliding. One afternoon she looked at me and asked, "You never ask about me. Do you know who I am?" I shrugged and told her the truth. "I know you bring your car when it needs fixing. That's enough." She tilted her head, studying me. Most men trip over themselves trying to impress me. I met her gaze. For her, my calmness was infuriating. For me, her presence was dangerously close to the walls I had built to protect Lily and myself. But fate has no patience for walls. The attraction between us grew, but so did the fear. I feared being nothing more than a story for her amusement, a distraction that would disappear as quickly as it came. And she feared finding something real in me, something strong enough to undo her defenses. Our hearts pulled closer, even as our minds whispered reasons to stay apart. Then one evening Lily clutched her stomach and whispered, "Daddy, my tummy hurts." "I know, sweetheart. Just rest. I'll take care of you," I told her softly. But my chest tightened with worry. I had just come home from a double shift. My wallet was nearly empty. The bills stacked high on the kitchen table were a reminder of how thin the margin of my life had become. And now Lily's fever was climbing, threatening to push us past that fragile line. I called the doctor, my voice tense. "Yes, doctor, I understand. No, I can't come in tonight, not without insurance. Please, can you?" "Right. I'll monitor her temperature." "Thank you." When I hung up, I rubbed my forehead, exhaustion pressing down like a weight. Taking a deep breath, I went back to her side and forced a smile. "It's okay, Lily. Daddy's here." But my eyes betrayed me. They held the fear I carried alone. And then there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Claire standing there, her expression soft but worried. I was surprised. My shirt untucked, my face written with worry. "Is she okay?" she asked quietly, glancing past me toward Lily. "She's fine. Just a fever." "I'll manage," I replied, hesitant, my guard rising. But Claire stepped inside before I could protest. "Let me help." I started to object, but Lily stirred, opening her eyes. In a faint whisper, she smiled and said, "Hi, lady with the shiny car." Claire knelt beside her, smiling gently. "Hi, sweetheart. I brought nothing with me tonight, but next time, I'll bring you something better than a car story." Lily giggled weakly before drifting back into sleep. I watched, torn between gratitude and pride. For Claire, this was a revelation. She looked around my small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the evidence of survival in every corner. Yet what she saw wasn't poverty. She saw love. She saw a father giving everything he had. "That's not for you to worry about," I said firmly, trying to guard the last pieces of myself. "Daniel, you're carrying this alone," she whispered. "That's what fathers do," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. There was silence between us. Claire studied me, and I knew she could see not just the strength I wanted to project, but the cracks I refused to admit. And in that moment she respected me more than she had ever respected the men who commanded millions. Because my empire was built on sacrifice, and my crown was the quiet devotion of a single child. But for me her presence was dangerous. The more she wove herself into our lives, the harder it would be to separate worlds that were never meant to meet. That night she stayed with us. She finished reading Lily's bedtime story, tucked her in, and then joined me in the kitchen. The air between us was heavy with unspoken truths. "She's beautiful," Claire said softly. "She's lucky to have you." "She's all I've got," I answered quietly, though I kept my distance. "Which is why I can't let her get attached. Not to someone who doesn't belong here." Her face tightened with hurt. "Is that what you think?" That I don't belong because my world is different. I lowered my eyes to the floor. Because your world will always call you back. And mine can't follow. It wasn't anger in my voice. It was fear. Fear of losing the one thing I couldn't afford to gamble with, my daughter's heart. Claire took a long breath, fighting emotion. You see walls. I see bridges. Maybe you don't think I belong here, but I've never felt more human than I do right now in this room with you. I shook my head. Claire, thank you for tonight. But you should go. She hesitated, then said quietly, Good night, Daniel. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the silence, torn between relief and regret. Pressing my palms to my face, I exhaled shakily. For her, the night revealed a truth she couldn't ignore. Respect had turned into something deeper. For me, it revealed my greatest fear, that the heart pulling me closer to her was the very thing that could break my fragile world apart. As she drove home, her hands gripped the wheel, her eyes wet but her tears refusing to fall. And I sat at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills, then at Lily sleeping peacefully. We were both lost in thought, both feeling the ache of something we couldn't yet name. It was the turning point. Not in the words we spoke but in the truths we felt. She had seen my vulnerability and instead of pity she found admiration. I had felt her closeness and instead of hope I felt fear. Two souls circling each other, caught in a push and pull neither of us could escape. I knew she whispered to herself that night, staring out at her glittering city skyline. He doesn't see it, but I belong there. With him. And I whispered to myself in the darkness, watching my daughter sleep. She deserves stability. Not dreams that don't fit our world. And so, the distance between us grew, even as the pull only tightened. Every story has its storm. For us, it didn't arrive with thunder. It came with whispers. Whispers that became headlines and headlines that threatened to tear apart everything we had built in fragile silence. They've printed it everywhere, someone told Claire. Rumors about you and the mechanic. Richard's people are pushing it. And for her, in her world, perception was power. And power was fragile. For me, the storm came in another form. A lawyer sat across from me and said, Mr. Miller, I represent your late wife's parents. They're filing for custody of Lily. They believe your financial situation is unstable. A court date has been set. I suggest you prepare. It was my greatest fear realized. To lose Lily. To lose the one reason I breathed each morning. And now the law, cold, heartless bureaucracy, threatened to take her away. Daddy, what's wrong? Lily asked softly. I knelt down beside her, forcing a smile even as my heart broke. Nothing, sweetheart. Everything's fine. But inside I was unraveling. When Lily asked me what was wrong, I knelt down, forced a smile and whispered, Nothing, sweetheart. Everything's fine. But inside I was unraveling. The storm didn't just come at home, it came in her world too. I'll never forget the night Richard, one of Claire's oldest rivals, tried to humiliate me in front of a crowded ballroom. Claire, darling, he said with that smug smirk of his. You've outdone yourself. But tell me, who's your guest? The valet? Or did he come to check the engines in the parking lot? Laughter rippled through the room. My jaw tightened, every muscle in me wanting to disappear into the floor. But Claire's face hardened, and in that moment she chose her side. He's not the valet, she said sharply. He's the man who reminds me what strength looks like. Something money can't buy. The room fell silent. She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine as cameras flashed around us. She could have laughed it off, distanced herself, let me fade into the shadows. But she didn't. She stood beside me, not as a CEO above her station, but as a woman unafraid of truth. I shook my head, whispering through clenched teeth. You don't understand. They're trying to take Lily. I can't fight them. I don't have the money, the lawyers, the power. My voice cracked, betraying the steady mask I'd always worn. Claire gripped my arm, fierce and unwavering. Then I'll fight with you. That was the battlefield I feared most. Not the grease-stained garage, not the whispers of co-workers, but the fight for my daughter's future. The grandparents' lawyer stood in court and painted me as unstable, unable to provide. I lowered my eyes, shame burning into me. But then Claire entered the courtroom. Heads turned. Murmurs spread. She sat behind me, her presence commanding silence. When they called her to testify, even I was stunned. She stood tall, her voice steady. I've seen how Daniel raises his daughter. He may not have wealth, but he has something far rarer. Stability. Well, dedication. Things money cannot replace. She looked from me to the judge. I'm a CEO. I know what it means to build something lasting. Daniel has built a home for Lily, Not perfect, not polished, but unbreakable. Taking her from him would not be protection. It would be destruction. Gasps rippled through the court. I stared at her, my throat tight, barely able to breathe. For the first time she used her power not for her empire, but for me. When court adjourned, I asked her, voice rough, why? Why would you risk your reputation, everything for me? She met my eyes, unwavering. Because when I said, if you fix this engine, I'll marry you, I didn't know I meant it. But I do. You fixed more than an engine that night, Daniel. You fixed something in me. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I'm not enough for you. Her reply cut through every wall I had built. You're everything I never knew I needed. And if you can't believe that for yourself, then believe it for Lily. She deserves to see her father loved for who he is. In that moment, my resistance crumbled. Our hands intertwined, not in a flash of passion, but in the quiet strength of two people choosing to fight together. The storm didn't break us. It revealed us. To the world. To each other. To ourselves. Weeks later, I found Claire at her office, phone pressed to her ear, voice tense. Pull the numbers again. No, I don't care how late it is. We need solutions before the market opens. If we don't act, we lose everything. She hung up and pressed her palms to her face. For the first time, her fortress of confidence cracked. She sank into her chair, shoulders heavy with the weight of everything she carried. I walked in quietly, still in my grease-stained jacket, carrying a thermos of coffee. Heard the news, I said softly. Figured you could use this. I set it down in front of her. She looked up, startled. You shouldn't be here. This isn't your world. I pulled up a chair across from her and leaned forward. Maybe not. But I know what it feels like to have everything on the line. To wonder if you're enough. So, I'll sit here with you. Until you remember that you are. I had no degree in finance, no stake in her empire. But my presence was steady, like the hum of an engine that never failed. And in that steadiness she found her strength again. Through her tears she smiled. You brought reinforcements. I smiled back. Best cheerleader I know. In that moment our worlds blended. Glass towers met kitchen tables. Power met humility. And for once neither of us felt out of place. Later, when Lily toddled in, smudges of grease still on her hands from the garage, Claire teased, starting her young I see. Better she learns now, I grinned faintly. Engines don't care about age or status. And in that laughter something healed. For all the battles we had fought, hers in the boardroom, mine in the garage, it was here, in grease-stained fingers, quiet meals, and the laughter of a child, that we found what we were both missing. One evening, as she leaned against my shoulder, she whispered, you know, when I first met you, I thought you were just fixing an engine. Turns out, you were fixing me. I looked down at her, eyes warm. And you were fixing me. Just, in ways I didn't know I needed. And so, the woman who once ate dinner alone learned to share her table. The man who feared losing everything realized he already had the one thing that mattered. And the little girl who clutched a worn stuffed rabbit found a new memory, laughter, warmth, and the promise that love in its simplest form would never leave again. Humility, after all, can win hearts where pride cannot. I didn't dazzle with wealth or command with titles. I simply loved my daughter, worked with my hands, and carried a strength that didn't need applause. That was enough to reach a woman who had everything, yet still felt alone. True love, I learned, is not about perfection but about presence. Not about avoiding storms but walking through them hand in hand. And sometimes, promises made in jest change lives forever. A playful remark over a broken engine became the seed of something lasting. Words spoken lightly carried truths deeper than either of us realized, shaping a future we never expected. Love, in the end, wasn't found in skyscrapers or garages, but in the spaces between, in a smile, in a hand held through fear, in a child's laughter echoing under a wide, forgiving sky. Now, when Lily holds my hand and Claire walks beside us down a sunlit street, I don't wonder if I'm enough. I know. Because for us, imperfect, stubborn, and real, love was always enough. I used to think the hardest battle I'd ever fight was to keep Lily with me. And in many ways it was. But what no one tells you is that love doesn't end at the courtroom victory or the moment two hands finally clasp together. Love is tested every single day after that. Claire and I were still two worlds colliding, oil-stained boots and polished heels. At first, the differences were charming. She teased me about my old flannel shirts. I teased her about never having cooked a meal without 3 assistants nearby. We laughed. But underneath, there were cracks waiting to show. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Claire stood in my kitchen staring at the bills stacked on the counter. Daniel, she said carefully, you don't have to do this alone anymore. Let me help. The words were kind but they cut. Pride burned in me like fire. I'm not a charity case, Claire. I can provide for my daughter. She stepped closer, frustration in her eyes. This isn't charity. This is partnership. Don't shut me out. But I did. At least for that night. Because old scars don't heal overnight. I had spent so long being the man who carried everything alone that I didn't know how to share the weight, even with someone who wanted nothing more than to stand beside me. Weeks later the tables turned. Claire faced a scandal in her company. A deal had gone sour, accusations flew, and her name was dragged through headlines. I watched her confidence crack, watched her fight tooth and nail to protect what she had built. But when I reached for her hand, she pulled away. "This isn't your battle, Daniel," she whispered. "I can't let you get dragged into my mess." I heard my own pride echoed in her voice. The same walls I had built, she had built too. And suddenly I realized that our love wasn't just about bridges, it was about learning to live without walls. The turning point came from Lily. She looked at me one evening, her little voice soft but certain. "Daddy, why does Miss Claire look sad all the time now? Don't you tell her it's okay like you tell me?" Out of the mouths of children come truths we adults pretend not to see. That night I went to Claire. I found her sitting on the floor of her penthouse, papers scattered, her phone buzzing with calls she refused to answer. For the first time I saw her not as a CEO or the woman who turned heads in every room, but as someone human, afraid, tired, and carrying too much alone. I sat beside her. No speeches, no solutions. Just silence and my hand finding hers. "Claire," I said quietly, "you don't have to carry this by yourself. Not anymore." And for the first time she didn't argue. She leaned against me trembling and whispered, "I don't know how to let someone in." I smiled faintly, pressing my forehead to hers. "Neither did I. But we're learning. Together." That night something shifted again. Not with grand gestures or courtroom declarations, but in the quiet decision to trust each other with the parts we feared most. Because love isn't just about fixing engines or winning custody battles, or even daring to hold hands in front of flashing cameras. Love is about the nights when bills scare you, when scandals break you, when pride almost ruins you, and still you stay. And so, we began the harder part of our story. Not the beginning, not the storm, but the building. The learning. The choosing every day to stand side by side. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet rhythm of our lives began to settle. Mornings were a dance of spilled cereal and hurried breakfast chats. Evenings a mix of bedtime stories and shared silence over bills and emails. There was no grand romance, just the small, steady proof that we were building something lasting. One Saturday Claire suggested we tackle the garden together. I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you get your hands dirty?" "Since I realized some things are better done slowly and together," she replied, gloves already in hand. Lily squealed with delight at the thought of planting flowers, and for the first time, I saw Claire's competitive, perfectionist edges soften into laughter and patience. As we dug, planted, and watered, I noticed how our small acts of care mirrored the bigger ones. Listening, holding space, sharing burdens. Even the arguments were different now. They weren't walls but negotiations, learning to bend without breaking. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, Claire and I sat on the porch, quiet but connected. She rested her head on my shoulder. "I never thought normal could feel this extraordinary," she murmured. I kissed her temple softly. "Normal is overrated. What we have, the real stuff, that's rare." And yet, life didn't pause for perfect moments. A new challenge arrived when my garage took on a demanding client, one whose deadlines threatened to swallow the weekend we had carefully carved out. I felt the old tug, pride, the need to prove I could handle it all, and I saw it mirrored in Claire, who had taken a late-night call from her legal team. The house was tense. Phones buzzed constantly, emails piled up, and Lily's laughter, once our balm, now felt distant as we both wrestled with obligations that seemed impossible to pause. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I found Claire in the living room, the glow of her laptop painting her face in pale blue light. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, yet there was that same fire in her eyes. "I can't let this drag me down, Daniel," she whispered. "I have to fight it." I sat beside her, hand brushing hers across the table. "You're not alone in this," I said softly. "We fight it together. Let me in." Her eyes welled with frustration and fear. "I don't want to drag you into my chaos. You've got your own battles." I shook my head. "This isn't about battles. It's about choosing each other when the storm hits. And right now, I choose you." For the first time she hesitated, then nodded. We spent the night strategizing, Not just business plans and client calls, but how we would support each other through the chaos. There were disagreements, moments of tension, but unlike before, we navigated them without walls or pride. The next morning we faced the world as a team. Claire walked into the investor meeting with me at her side, grounding her when doubts whispered too loudly. I managed my client crisis, feeling her confidence ripple through me as if we were tethered by a shared strength neither of us had felt before. By the end of the week, the storms had calmed. Claire's company emerged intact, my garage delivered on time, and Lily ran through the yard, her laughter echoing like a triumph we both understood. That night we sat on the porch, the air cool and filled with the scent of spring flowers. Claire leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, a small smile tugging at her lips. I think we can handle anything as long as we face it together. I kissed her temple gently. Anything, I said, holding her hand tight. Even the storms we didn't see coming. And in that quiet, after the chaos had passed, I understood what love truly meant. Not perfection, not grand gestures, not even victory over circumstance. It was the choice to stay, to hold, to fight alongside someone when life demanded it most. We weren't invincible. We weren't flawless. But for the first time we were unshakable, not because the world bent to our will, but because we bent toward each other, every single day. Spring gave way to summer, and life settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and miraculous. The storms had passed, but their echoes remained, reminders of what we had faced and proof of what we had become. One afternoon, Lily tugged at our hands, insisting we build a treehouse in the backyard. Claire rolled up her sleeves and I grabbed the toolbox, and together we transformed a bare patch of yard into a fortress of laughter and imagination. As nails were hammered and wood lifted, I caught Claire's eye. She smiled, not the practiced smile of a CEO, but the pure, unguarded joy of a woman fully present. When the treehouse stood complete, Lily clambered inside, waving from the tiny window. "It's perfect," she shouted. Claire laughed, brushing her hands on her jeans, and I realized in that moment how far we'd come. Later that evening we sat on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the city skyline. Claire rested her head on my shoulder, and Lily's small hand found mine. Silence settled around us, but it was warm, full of unspoken understanding. "You know," Claire said softly, "I used to think I needed to do everything alone to be strong. I was wrong." I squeezed her hand. "Me too. Strength isn't standing alone. It's standing together." Lily yawned, curling up between us. "Daddy, Mommy, I love us," she mumbled sleepily. We smiled at each other, hearts full. In that simple declaration, all the struggles, all the pride and fear, all the battles we'd fought separately and together, they mattered, but they didn't define us. What defined us was this: the choice to stay, to trust, to build a life in the quiet, messy, beautiful spaces between chaos and calm. That night, I tucked Lily into her treehouse bedroom, now complete with her favorite stuffed animals and a little lamp that cast warm stars across the walls. Claire kissed her forehead, whispering, "Sleep tight, my brave girl." When we finally sat together on the porch, the city lights flickering around us, I realized that life wasn't about perfect endings. It was about presence, commitment, and the courage to be vulnerable. And in our presence we had everything we needed. I looked at Claire and then at Lily, and in that moment I knew, our love wasn't just enough, it was everything. Imperfect, stubborn, real, and enduring, it had weathered storms, survived pride, and grown stronger for it. And so, as the night settled around us, we held hands under the wide, forgiving sky, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together. Our family, our home, our love, unshakable, unbroken, and entirely ours. The morning of Lily's first day at school arrived with a mix of excitement and quiet anxiety. The house, once filled with the sound of rattling tools and coffee cups, now buzzed with a different kind of energy, the sound of change. Lily sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and adjusting her little backpack, the one with stars that glimmered when sunlight touched it. Claire knelt beside her, fussing over her collar while Daniel watched from the doorway, hands in his pockets, trying not to let his emotions show. "You'll be great," he said softly. "Just be yourself, okay?" Lily grinned. "I'll make friends." Miss Claire said confidence is key. Claire laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And listen to your teacher. That's also key." As they walked her to school, Daniel felt his chest tighten with a strange blend of pride and loss. The little girl who once clung to his hand during every errand was growing wings. Claire, ever composed, seemed calm, but he could see the nervousness behind her steady eyes. For both of them, letting Lily step into the world was another lesson in trust, not in fate but in what they had built together. When Lily finally turned at the school gate and waved, Daniel felt something settle inside him. She wasn't just his anymore, she was theirs, and that truth was as humbling as it was beautiful. Claire reached for his hand. "She's going to be amazing," she whispered. He nodded, knowing she already was. The days that followed brought new rhythms. Daniel's garage, once a modest space cluttered with old engines and late-night projects, began to change. Word spread through the community about his craftsmanship and honesty, and soon he was turning down more work than he could take. He resisted the idea of expanding at first. Pride and habit whispered that too much growth meant losing control. But Claire saw what he couldn't yet see, that his work had become more than survival. It was legacy. One evening she brought him blueprints. "Just an idea," she said, placing them on the table. "A larger space, more hands, better equipment." "You've earned it, Daniel." He hesitated, tracing the lines with calloused fingers. "This feels big. I've never done something like this." She smiled. "You fixed more than engines, remember? You built trust. People believe in you. It's time you believe in yourself too." So they did it, not with grandeur but with purpose. The new garage stood at the edge of town, sunlight pouring through wide windows, every corner filled with the smell of oil and promise. Daniel hired 2 apprentices, young men who reminded him of himself years ago, determined, uncertain, hungry to learn. Each time he watched them work, he saw the quiet reflection of the man he used to be, and it filled him with gratitude. One afternoon, Claire visited during lunch break, wearing jeans and holding a box of sandwiches. The apprentices exchanged nervous smiles as the once intimidating CO sat on an upturned crate beside Daniel, laughing about the smell of grease. "You've changed this place," she told him, looking around. He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow. "No, we did. You taught me to see more than limits." For Daniel, the garage was more than a business. It was a symbol of humility grown into confidence, of partnership born from patience, and of the quiet courage it takes to accept help. Meanwhile, Claire was going through her own transformation. The scandal that once threatened to ruin her reputation had done something she never expected. It freed her. No longer bound to shareholders or endless boardroom games, she began something new, a mentorship program for young women navigating leadership in life. She called it Second Chances, though Daniel teasingly called it Claire 2.0. The program started small, just a group of 10 women meeting in her old office once a week. But word spread quickly. Her story, of falling, rebuilding, and learning to ask for help, resonated deeply. She spoke not from a pedestal, but from a place of experience and vulnerability. "I used to think success meant being untouchable," she told them one evening. "Now I know it means being unafraid to start again." Daniel attended her first public seminar, sitting quietly in the back row, watching her speak with the same fire that once scared him. Only now it inspired him. When the applause erupted, she met his gaze and smiled, the kind that said, "We did it, not apart but together." Months later they took their first family vacation. It wasn't extravagant, no luxury resorts or 5-star hotels. Just a road trip along the coast in Daniel's old pickup truck, the back piled with snacks, a tent, and Lily's endless collection of stuffed animals. The first night was chaos. Claire forgot her phone charger, Daniel misplaced the map, and Lily accidentally dropped their bag of marshmallows into the campfire. But instead of frustration, there was laughter, deep, unrestrained laughter that echoed through the quiet campsite. They spent mornings watching the sunrise over the ocean, afternoons collecting shells and chasing waves, and evenings sitting by the fire, telling stories. Claire, once so used to control and structure, learned to find peace in imperfection. Daniel, once fearful of losing everything, found joy in simplicity. And Lily, wide-eyed and curious, found the kind of happiness children remember for a lifetime. On their last night, as the stars shimmered above, Claire leaned into Daniel's shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "I used to chase the horizon. I thought happiness was out there somewhere, in titles, in money, in the next big win. But it was here all along." Daniel smiled, his thumb brushing over her hand. "Sometimes you just need to stop long enough to see it." Lily, curled up between them, stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about the treehouse and the beach. Daniel and Claire shared a look, one filled with quiet gratitude and the unspoken promise that whatever the future brought, they would meet it together. In the end, the new beginning wasn't about change in the world around them. It was about change within, the slow, steady unfolding of a love that had learned to breathe. They had weathered storms and pride and fear, and now they were learning the beauty of peace. There were still challenges ahead, of course, bills to pay, deadlines to meet, unexpected turns waiting just beyond the horizon. But there was also laughter, shared dreams, and a child's voice calling them back to what mattered most. For Daniel, love no longer felt like something fragile that could be lost. It was strong, living, and intertwined with every small act of care. For Claire, success was no longer a race to win but a journey to share. And for Lily it was simple. Home wasn't a place but the two people who held her hand when the world seemed big. The morning sunlight painted soft gold lines through the kitchen window as Daniel helped Lily tie the ribbons on her shoes. She fidgeted with excitement, her little backpack swaying side to side. Claire leaned on the doorway watching them, her two worlds intertwined in a way that still made her chest ache with gratitude. It was Lily's first day of school, and while Daniel tried to seem calm, his trembling hands betrayed the emotion under his steady smile. "Remember, sweetheart," Daniel said, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, "be kind, be brave, and if you ever get scared." "I look for the red car in the parking lot," Lily interrupted proudly, reciting what they'd practiced all week. Claire laughed softly, walking over to kneel beside them. "And you remember to listen to your teacher. No climbing trees this time, okay?" The drive to the school was quiet at first, the kind of silence full of thoughts neither parent wanted to speak aloud. When Lily ran into her classroom, waving one last time before vanishing into a sea of backpacks and chatter, Claire felt a tug inside her heart, a strange mix of joy and grief. Daniel stood beside her, staring at the empty doorway, then exhaled. "She didn't even look back," he whispered. Claire smiled faintly. "That means we did something right." They lingered in the car after, talking about how quickly time had slipped away. For the first time in years, neither of them had to rush. No urgent emails, no phone calls. Just the quiet rhythm of a new chapter beginning. A few weeks later, Daniel's garage smelled of sawdust, oil, and quiet ambition. The single workbench that once felt like a lifeline during his hardest days had multiplied into rows of neatly arranged tools. Local clients now came by for repairs and restorations, and his name had started to spread through the small community. But it wasn't just about business, it was about belonging again. He'd started mentoring two young mechanics from the neighborhood, teaching them the patience that came from years of rebuilding engines and, unknowingly, rebuilding himself. Claire watched from the background, often arriving with food or supplies by coincidence. She never said it out loud, but she'd invested quietly in his business, upgrading his equipment, helping him register the company officially. When Daniel found out, he didn't scold her. He simply looked at her one evening and said, "You've always believed in what I couldn't see." She smiled, touching his arm gently. "Because I knew what it looked like when you finally did." Meanwhile, Claire had begun her own transformation. After the collapse of her firm and the fallout that nearly cost her everything, she decided not to return to the corporate battlefield. Instead, she founded a mentorship initiative for young women entering business, women who had drive but no map. Her first meeting was held in the very same cafe where she and Daniel had once argued about ambition and values. This time she spoke differently, not from a pedestal but from a place of humility. "There's a strength," she told them, "in walking away from the version of success that doesn't let you sleep at night." The program grew slowly, but every story she heard reminded her of her own, of what she'd lost and what she'd found again in its place. That summer, the three of them took their first real vacation together, a modest road trip along the coast. They packed too much, forgot half of it, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Lily insisted on collecting seashells from every beach, naming each one after something she loved: Mommy shell, Daddy shell, the brave shell. On the third evening, as the sun melted into the ocean, Daniel and Claire sat watching Lily chase seagulls along the shoreline. Claire leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "She's growing fast," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "So are we." They sat in silence, feeling the world slow down. No more running, no more surviving. Just living. The wind carried the smell of salt and new beginnings, and somewhere between the laughter of their daughter and the crash of the waves, they realized that love was no longer a battle to win. It was something they built, one gentle, imperfect day at a time. Years passed quietly, the way time does when life finally finds its rhythm. The small house that once echoed with uncertainty now pulsed with laughter, music, and the soft thud of Lily's footsteps as she grew taller, braver, more curious about the world beyond her parents' arms. Daniel's garage had turned into a well-known local workshop, no longer just a space for machines but a gathering place for people who needed guidance, not just on engines but on life. His apprentices had become friends. One of them even opened his own small shop nearby, calling it Redline Motors in quiet tribute. Daniel often smiled when he saw the sign. "You never really lose the things you fix," he'd tell his students. "They just start new engines somewhere else." At home, Claire's mentorship program had evolved into something bigger than she'd imagined. She'd partnered with a few regional organizations to create the Compass Project, a network of women helping each other navigate leadership without losing themselves. What began as a small group meeting over coffee had grown into a movement, yet she still answered every message herself, remembering what it felt like to fall and rise again. Sometimes when she came home late from an event, she'd find Daniel in the garage, his hands stained with oil, the radio humming softly. She'd stand at the doorway, watching the man who once doubted his worth become the anchor of something strong and good. "You still working at this hour?" she'd tease. "Only waiting for you," he'd reply, smiling. Their conversations had softened over the years, less about proving, more about understanding. They spoke about plans, about Lily's dreams, and about what kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. Not the kind written in ledgers or magazines but in hearts. The auditorium smelled of flowers and fresh paper. Daniel adjusted his tie for the third time, pretending not to wipe a tear as Lily walked across the stage. She had inherited his quiet determination and Claire's confident poise, a balance that made her seem older than her years. When she received her diploma, her eyes found them in the crowd and she smiled, the same soft, knowing smile Claire once gave Daniel when everything seemed lost. Afterward, they stood outside under a cluster of blooming jacarandas. Claire handed Lily a small envelope. Inside was a key. "What's this?" Lily asked, frowning in curiosity. "It's to the garage," Daniel said. "It's yours now if you ever want it. Or not. What matters is that you always have a place to start something." Lily's eyes shimmered as she hugged them both. "I'll build something," she whispered. "I don't know what yet, but I'll make it count." Years later, when the garage hummed under new management and the Compass Project continued without Claire's daily touch, the couple often sat on the porch during the golden hour, a quiet ritual that had become their evening prayer. Daniel's hair had silvered and Claire's laugh had deepened with time, but they still looked at each other the same way they did the night everything almost fell apart, with gratitude. "Do you ever think," Daniel asked one evening, "that all of this, the mistakes, the storms, was the only way we'd find our peace?" Claire took his hand, her fingers threading through his, steady and sure. "Maybe peace isn't found," she said softly. "Maybe it's built like everything else we ever cared about." They sat there watching the sky shift from orange to violet. The sounds of life surrounded them, neighbors chatting, a radio somewhere down the street, the faint clatter of tools from the new owner of Daniel's old shop. In that moment, they knew that what they had created was more than a second chance. It was a life, not perfect, not easy, but deeply real. Months later, a letter arrived from Lily, now working abroad on a community design project that combined engineering and education. "Mom, Dad," it began, "I finally understand what you both taught me. You built things, not just with hands but with hearts. You fixed what was broken even when it was yourselves. I see now that growth isn't about becoming something new. It's about remembering who we are when everything else falls away. Thank you for showing me what love looks like when it grows up." Claire folded the letter, tears glistening in her eyes. Daniel placed a hand over hers, wordless but full of understanding. Outside, the wind brushed through the old jacaranda tree, the same one that had witnessed their beginnings, their battles, their rebuilding. And as evening settled over the quiet home they had made, Claire and Daniel simply sat together, hands intertwined, hearts steady, the sound of the world finally at peace with itself. Because love, they realized, wasn't something you found once.